So yeah, so thanks for that, Paul. Yeah. All right. So with that, I would like to begin our dialogue, and so our intention here is to invite Skyler into discussing his reflections on his transition experience, his questioning, and his arrival here today. And so I want to begin by saying, by asking this, one question, and that is that. So about 4 years ago, I began writing this book. And I began writing this book because the experience that we had in our family with Skyler, Skyler's sister Lauren, and Skyler's father and my husband, now ex-husband, Hugh, was actually it was really supportive. It had a few bumps at the beginning, but it was really supportive, and we moved through Skyler's questioning and transition in a way that that was successful, I would say, ultimately in a general way. What I heard from my friends and people I knew, liberal, smart, educated people, was a questioning, was a, what is this? How can you be so open? I don't know if I would be so open. This is this is weird. This is strange. And this began taking place about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, before Caitlyn Jenner, before Orange is the New Black, before all of that. And so it got me wondering about why it seemed so seamless for me and why it was such an issue for others. And that's when I got really curious about how other people perceived gender questioning and how people were responding to it. And it led me down a road of research. So this research began with diligence about 4 years ago. And I told Skyler I was doing this, and he said, "Ma, this is your project, nothing to do with me." And so I about a year ago, I asked Skyler again. I said, "Skyler, are you interested in being a part of it? Are you interested in even contributing a bit?" And he repeated, and he said, "Ma, this is your project. I don't really want to have much to do with it. This is your gig." And so, Skyler, I'm interested to know, when I came to you at that point, what was occurring to you? Why was there that kind of push that you didn't want to have anything to do with the project?
Yeah, I guess a lot of things happened. I think, when you and I were reflecting on some of this, we kind of joked that it went from you inviting me to write a sentence to writing a paragraph, and that became a forward and then a chapter. And I think there was a lot of things that went into me not wanting to be a part of it, and part of that was just that I wasn't really sure what to say. Um, and part of it was that it's a really intimidating thing to write about because gender is just such a personal experience. And so to write anything that's going to speak to the masses is just something that even right now I don't feel qualified for, really, because I am who I am. Right, I am Skyler, and my experience of my own transition is really will be different than any other person's because everybody has histories and family dynamics and insights, struggles, And so the idea of approaching this as a entity, like a whole project that would be then put out to the public, um, yeah, I just wasn't really, I wasn't sure where to start. And I think that in truth, I also wanted you to take it upon yourself to learn from other resources other than me, because a really common burden to fall on people that are, for transitioning or coming out as anything, whether it's, gay or queer or anything, let alone trans or non-binary, to then, have to educate people on what that means and become the sole sort of source of information. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to engage conversations and to constantly be trying to explain yourself. And it's difficult enough to try to figure out how you want to be, let alone explain it to other people, all the different steps along the way. And so when you had asked me, I felt like even though at the core, our family was loving, and even at the core, we got through difficult stages of me coming out as trans, because it wasn't just an immediate, oh, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense for you. It became more sensical on our reflections, right? And we had lots of conversations about, oh, right, like you told me, right, when you were 4, if I had known about, uh, you know, positioning as a possibility, maybe it would have come into my mind that you might have been trans. But instead, I think it sounded like you and dad thought, oh, okay, we're probably raising a kid who's probably going to grow up to be gay. Like you said that, my dad said that, and so it was interesting to hear these kinds of reflections that came through into more clarity as time went on. But I wanted you to sort of take it upon yourself to find the resources, do the research, and if you kind of made it through to a point where you felt confident and comfortable enough to want to write a book, that was going to take a lot of work that I kind of didn't want to be the foundation for, right? And so it was both out of intimidation and, from my own standpoint of not being sure what to share, wanting to ask you almost like a call to action from you, who's my mom, but also somebody who takes, pleasure in public speaking, to really, educate yourself, because I'm also not the dictionary or the, poster child for transitioning, and I can't
Yeah.
possibly know everything about it, right? So it was done. Yeah, it was a lot of things. It was.
And so, when I hear you say that, I reflect on some of the people I have, the trans people I've spoken with in various workplaces, and they say that also about their um, their reticence in workplaces. They don't want to be the source of their colleagues' information, and they want to. They don't. You know, this is not a novelty. It's not a circus act. It's not something to be prodded. And I have heard that reflected also, that people just don't want to be the personal source of information. People need to go and find out their own information and then be treated just as regular people. And that's what I'm hearing from you as well, is that you wanted to push back on that. um and then that came to a different place, because then you said, well, there's nothing for me to say, I'm just living my life. And I said, well, that's exactly the whole point. That is what what the invitation is to write about. And then it shifted, and then I said, well, you know what, why don't you just write one paragraph? And you said, okay, I'll write one paragraph. And that one paragraph then turned into a foreword. And that foreword then turned into, and it was, beautifully articulate, reflective bit. And then that turned into a whole chapter. And so, can you just talk about what shifted for you, how you came to not wanting to write about it, to suddenly say, okay, 10 years later, I'm ready to talk about this?
Yeah, I think um, I'm
Uh-oh.
been able to just my life as my uh-oh. Can you
Your
all hear me?
No, your technology is going in and out.
I'm not sure what to do about that. Out of it.
Uh,
Maybe have
okay, well, it's good that you've turned your video off. See, technology is okay. Here you are again. Okay,
Am I unfrozen?
you're unfrozen. Yeah.
Fantastic. Right. So I forget the sentence.
So it's really, so the question really is to look at what shifted for you,
Yeah.
from saying no to then wanting to just speak. And I know you said this is the first time I've actually written about my experience. And so what occurred
Yeah.
for you to shift
Yeah.
that?
I think where I was headed was just that enough time had passed where this wasn't a new subject for me to explore out loud, at least. And I think working with as a counselor, working with clients with their experience of transitioning or gender questioning, talking to friends about it, just being more well versed in the conversation made me feel able to approach it in terms of just saying, okay, fine, I'll write a paragraph. And then actually writing really turned into a huge process, like a really enjoyable and hard at times process that I wasn't expecting. It was kind of like the amount that I wrote versus what ended up in the book was, only a portion of it because there's just so much to unpack. And then when it comes to what to share and what to say, the details of it, I mean, um, you don't know what people want to hear about, right? So trying to feel like this was an opportunity to provide some information, some insight, without getting too sidetracked with details that would be not necessarily helpful. It would be almost a different book, but was a way for me to sort of enter a conversation that I feel really needs to be elevated, because I think right now there are a lot more open ears for this kind of conversation. And I didn't feel like I needed to stay in a place of comfort of not sharing because you had put the work in to provide this as a platform. I thought, what a missed opportunity this would be if I hadn't just tried. And that was the thing, is I hadn't tried before. So when I sat down to write, I was really surprised with what came through, and it felt like a really important thing to just keep putting energy into, which is why also these kinds of conversations, going forward, having the dialogues on difficult conversations, uh, I feel will provide also a more of a full scope of voices, because like I said, I'm just one voice, and there's a lot of other voices out there with very different experiences. And as someone said, Stephanie Howard, we haven't met, but I came in and you were sharing about the languaging is that language is so important. And so, we need more people being able to say, hey, this didn't really resonate, or actually this wasn't correctly expressed. And I wanted this experience to be not about shaming. I wanted it to be about inviting a conversation too. And so it's difficult to get it all right the first time. And I think I was very nervous about that. But when I was able to write about my experience versus trying to come in as a trans expert, it flowed a lot easier for me. So it's kind of what shifted for me a bit.
Yeah, that last comment it really resonates. you came in with your experience rather than as a trans expert.
Yeah, it's very intimidating. The idea of, I think that's the thing around sharing your experience. Like when I had asked you to put in the work to do your own research and resource out other than learning from me, I did that because I I mean I can share my insights, but I'm one person of a very large population, right? And so it feels intimidating to say, yeah, I know exactly what the trans experience is about because I can tell you what my life has been like, but that so much of my life has been nothing about being trans, right? So um, it's a good conversation to continue.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I just one other question before we open it up to others who might have questions for you, and that is, what are some key things that you want people to know about your transition experience? What are some reflections that particularly sit on you that you want to share?
Mm, I think I think feeling support from people around me, in the sense of just not feeling judged or rushed to explain myself, um, was something that honestly I can't express how helpful that was. It was beyond what I would perceive to be helpful. It's what made things possible. Finding safety in friendship, in and also I think I think just honestly being in a position where um, I didn't want to rush myself to provide other people the information I didn't have about myself. So taking time to just kind of figure out myself before I, you know, presented myself to the world. So much happens internally, and the world only sees such a small portion of that. And so I think I think what feels important to suggest or to express is that we are a lot more than we all seem, right? And what we show to the world is just part of our expression of who we are, how we feel. And so this idea that being trans is very different, I find is an interesting subject because yes, there is a difference between genders, and there is actually a lot of pride in gender variance and gender expression. um, I do think that at the core, the humanness is what we forget, and so it happens, with a lot of different points of intersectionality, whether it's race or whether it's religion, whether it's gender, whatever the topic that we're talking about is. I mean, at the core of it, we need to kind of remember that we're speaking to another human, and so that what comes through, what's really important is to embrace the individual that's in front of you, not the aspect that's different than you, right? Because we're all different, and we all also share many similar unique traits, right? So it's interesting that something like transgender is seen as something that we're trying to wrap our minds around as if it's something that's so out there, when really in reality, when we look at human history, there have been gender variant populations since human populations began, since the beginning of time, right? And so it's not something new. It's just um, and it's not something to be afraid of. It's sort of, what if I could leave people with an idea, is just to embrace who you are, right? It's to have courage to create space within yourself to have those conversations, to say, yeah, this doesn't feel right to live my life this way just because I'm told that I'm supposed to, right? And then see where that leads you, because whether that leads you to a career change or leads you to a gender change, like I don't know, but we all have to kind of figure out who we are, and create space for that. And so um, doing that on our own is something strikes me as really important. And then adding in the piece of feeling supported, feeling safe, emotional safety around, even if it's one person, um, being able to bring that conversation even to just one person can make just a world of a difference. So, yeah.
Mm. Thank you. Um, so I hear you talk about emotional safety. Um, I hear you talk about how we have, as human beings, have so much in common as experience and so many differences, and that gender is just another difference and not something to be afraid of or treated with such um, strangeness, but something just to be integrated.
Yeah, and get and have fun with and be curious about. I mean, gender can be fun. It doesn't have to be so serious, right? Like, I mean, it's interesting to talk to people about how difficult it is to express who they feel they are in whatever gender expression they feel is true to them. And a lot of that has nothing to do with them not knowing who they are. It has a lot to do with fearing judgment or harsh reactions from other people. Right? A lot of people know who they are if you ask them, if they spent the time or there's space to take up to really explore that. But often it's, yeah, am I going to lose my partner? Is my family going to, deny me love or kick me out? Right? Am I going to lose a job? Right? So, like that's why I think emotional safety is just such a huge component to this that really needs to be taken into account, right? What does emotional safety mean to you and how can you access it, right? And that's including people who don't identify as trans or who aren't going through a lot of these kinds of questions, for people who would be considered allies or just helping to create safe space. Like, what does that mean? What has helped you in your life thrive? What has made you feel supported? Whether or not, you've needed to come out to the world in any kind of way, but there are things that we can all connect to that will lead us in the direction of being more open and supportive to others going through difficult times by looking at things that have helped ourselves too, right? So gender is another topic. It's a unique and can be a really fun topic, but it's also one that needs to be looked at as um, it's a newer global conversation, which is interesting, but it's not a new conversation.
No, in the history of humanity, you mean?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right. Um, so before we carry on, thank you. I just want to stop there and open it up to others to ask Skyler questions or to find out if to just invite you uh, to dialogue with Skyler about his experience or your experience. One of the things that you might want to share also is this whole notion of the concept of emotional safety, and how how you create it. Like, how do you create emotional safety in your world? Because the things about you are maybe different than things about your partner or your kids or your friends. There are things about each of us that requires emotional safety.
So I just want to, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Hi, hi, Skyler. Hi,
Hey.
Kelly Carroll. Hi.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah. I'm so excited for you all. I think this is like amazing. But you said something very interesting. Being trans doesn't define you. And I hear that very often with my group of kids with diabetes. Diabetes doesn't define them. They are who they are, and they just happen to have diabetes. Like you who you are, you just happen to be trans. Is that basically what your statement is?
Yeah, yeah, there could be a lot of statements made, and in some ways that it's um, at the core of it somewhat true, and in other ways that feels almost dismissive. But I do think, and not because you're saying it, but I know that I'm the one that put that out there. But I say that dismissiveness almost because it's complex.
Mhm.
I didn't wake up one day and decide to make my life extra interesting by transitioning. I'll put it that way.
difficult.
right? And it was just something that is a process. And so I think, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, similar to what, you know, people with diabetes say, like, it's not like the population you work with chose to end up with diabetes, right? I mean, I didn't, it's sort of it's an interesting cross section around health, right? For sure. So we don't have control over our bodies in that way.
Right.
Same way I didn't have control over what felt right for me. When I realized that transitioning was an option, um, that that became an entire whole other world that I was introduced to, and that sort of threw me into a process where I felt like, oh my goodness, is this something that I have to choose? I have to, if I know this to be true about myself and I choose to go in that direction, I can never undo it because I'll have admitted this truth to myself and then to the rest of the world. There are people that do choose to transition and then decide they'd like to detransition. That hasn't been my truth, and that hasn't been, something that I felt that I wanted to do or needed to do. This has felt really real and very not real. This has felt very accurate for me. But yeah, essentially, I feel like kind of how my mom described it, like when she had asked me, did I want to be a part of this book? And I said, no, it's your thing, because I'm just me. I'm just living my life. I wasn't sure what would be interesting or even, what to say about it. Did that answer your question? I kind of went on, but.
Susie, I want to ask a question.
Hold on, but before you do, Paul, for Paul and has asked before, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
What an honor I feel to be part of this parlance. Actually, it's so intimate and revealing, and so enlightening. Sentence by sentence, Skyler, I've been enlightened by your words, and I can't help but think in terms of images sometimes, and I sort of think of a mother whale and a young whale, and the point that was made by the other speaker, DFH admin, around a part of one's identity, and this trying to clarify. I think that was educational for me too, and yet I feel that Mom was helping you to birth this part of your identity, and just in what I heard the two of you say the last 15, 20 minutes, it's really quite beautiful.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's good to see you again. I know you were at the book launch too, and so thanks for coming to this event too.
My pleasure.
Cal.
I got a question. This is a naive question, and I apologize for it, but this is to all the attendees. Skyler, you made a comment about jobs being trans. Could someone, or I open the question to everyone there, how does being trans affect your job security, your job position, applying for a job? I won't go into the prejudicial aspect, that's a different ballgame, but just about being hired and being employed, having come out to your employer as being trans if one has admitted that.
It's not a naive question. It's a great question.
That's an open question to everybody.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a good question. It's a good curiosity. I think it's interesting that you separated the question from the potential prejudice that the individual would experience, and I think that that's actually the issue. Is it's not that whoever's come out as trans is less equipped to engage in any kind of job. It has everything to do with the attitudes around the employers and the workplace that would either be helping provide an environment of fluidity where an individual shows up to work because they've been hired to do a job, or there's now somebody who's experiencing workplace discrimination, right? Sometimes there's, somebody else asked this actually in the book launch, and they asked me if I had ever had experiences or had trouble getting employment, and I sort of quickly said, well, you know what, I used to work in kitchens and people didn't really care what I looked like, but I can't say that would have been the case if I had been trying to get a job in the front of house as a server or a host or anything like that, bartender. And I almost wish I hadn't said that, because I feel like, yes, that's been my experience, but it really depends on who's in charge of hiring. And it also depends on stages of transition. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think what I have experienced in my life, and the conversation that is often the one that's being had, is that there's a lot of discomfort in the non-binary or androgynous stages, or in states of transition, if people can see that there is something to question. So where I find myself in my transition is I'd be considered passing as male. I don't tend to get questioned about my gender at this point in my life, but I can't say that was always the case. There was lots of androgynous stages of my life, as well as in my transition. And what I experienced in those parts of my life versus what I experience now is very different. So, for instance, in January, in the States, Joe Biden, re-signed some declarations which allowed sort of the don't ask, don't tell, kind of adding on to the don't ask, don't tell, that reinstated the ability for trans populations to be a part of the military again, which was something that Trump had tried to, he essentially said, we do not support trans populations to fight for America. That's what is, and so whether or not somebody is trans or not has nothing to do with their ability to do a job. And so it just has a lot to do with, though, the statements of the whoever's running that company, or whoever's, has the power to say that you're not allowed to be who you are in this establishment, right? It's a really common thing. People that, in all kinds of stages of transition experience adversity when trying to access employment, and there are a lot of intersections there, and some of it is gender based, some of it is racial based, some of it is ageism, some of it is all kinds of things. There's so many things to take into account, so it's difficult to say it's just this one thing. A lot of it is fear of the other, and judgment, and prejudice.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I just to reflect my own understanding and knowledge of this topic from just an observer and an academic researcher, is that difference creates fear in people, and that's what we're experiencing, whether it's on a cultural level, or on a skin color level, or a religious level, or a gender level. We all, many of us lived through this sexual revolution, as it were, and that was about making acceptable difference in sexual orientation, making acceptable same-sex lifestyle. And that created huge uproar in the world, because it was different from the majority. This is similar in that way. Gender difference is gender variance, is not the norm. The majority of the population are cisgender, people who do not question their gender, people who've never asked, I wonder if I should be a different gender. Most people don't ever ask that question. And because they don't ever ask that question, it doesn't occur to them that other people do ask that question, and that those who do ask that question can be validated. That's where the difference comes. And when there's difference, there's fear. And when there's fear, there's conflict. And when there's conflict, there's bad behavior. And that's just how it goes. And when that is matched with a political orientation of not accepting difference, then it gets even worse. And when that's measured or matched with cultural or religious resistance, then it gets even worse. We are so lucky in this country. I know not everyone in this call currently lives in Canada, but for those of us who live in Canada, we are, and particularly Toronto, because Toronto is, I think, considered the most diverse city in the world, diverse accepting. So we are very much of a live and let live kind of city. And Canada is also a country that is very accepting and politically liberal. So we're really, really lucky here. And because we are so lucky and we don't have a significant political weight of discrimination, we forget that much of the rest of the world does.
I do want to just say, though, I think that right now I think Canadian, I don't know, I think awareness of the statistics in Canada around discrimination, I really hope that we bring in actually more of a platform in a future dialogue with other organizations that are doing statistical data work, working with that kind of information, because there's, what is it? It's Trans Purely Canada. Transpulse Canada is an entire organization that dedicates all their research projects to getting statistical data for trans populations. And there is there's actually a huge amount of evidence that is saying that one of the largest issues around discrimination in Canada right now is gender-based and is around gender variance and trans populations, and you're far more likely by many folds to experience violence or sexual assault from police and authority figures if you're part of the BIPOC community, right? So it's there's this idea that Canadians are so polite and we're so accepting, and we don't really have a lot of violence towards difference. But it's true that in comparison to the States, that's true. But there is a lot of work to be done still. And a lot of that has to do with sharing information. And a lot of that has to do with getting statistical data, which is difficult to do for a population that is really hard to define. And it's also really hard to do for a population that, the access point for actually getting a call out for information or being a part of, any kind of survey is there are a lot of barriers in terms of that. So I think that, for general knowledge, right, it wasn't until 2017 until it was a Canadian Bill of Rights to protect trans populations or gender variant populations, seems like yesterday, right? So there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of that is about having conversations and connecting with people on the ground level of sort of saying to each other, how are you? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? And asking questions that might seem like, Cal, like your question, even though you're saying, oh, like, forgive this question, it's an important question to ask. If you don't know, how are you supposed to find out the information, right? So I think the sharing of knowledge is really, really important, and then also checking our assumptions, right? So it's better to not assume and better to just try to do the research and ask the questions.
Thank you.
If I-
Judy,
can I-
you had a, sorry, Stephanie,
Yes.
That's okay. Yeah.
after Judy. Thank you.
Well, I was talking to a woman about your book, and I was very excited about it, and she just said, "Oh, I don't understand it," just like that. And I said to her, "Well, have you ever been pregnant? Have you ever had a child?" She said, "No." And I said, "Well,
You can go
then
in.
you're not going to understand it from firsthand experience, you know? So do you have to understand everything to be accepting?" So I think on a very simple level, people want some understanding. And that's why your book is so important, because I said, well, you've got to read this book. And it's just, you know, we all go through life experiencing things that we will never experience. Like I don't, you know, I'm married to Henry. I don't know what it feels like to be Henry, you know. There are lots of things that we will never experience in life, but we just, they're just there. So this I think will become something. It's a process to become something that just is. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
And thank you, Judy. I mean that ultimately that's really the point of and the intention of this book is to normalize, is to create enough or to communicate enough information to enough people so that they understand, they feel comfortable, and there are no issues. It's just another aspect of difference to be integrated and normalized and lived with, and that's really the intention of this. So thank you for that.
What I would also say is celebrate it and for questions to be, you know, have a place of conversation, right? And so the idea that it's like I was having this conversation the other day, and someone said, "Well, like, how can I tell my family that I want to come out, and how do I tell my family that I'm a boy?" You know, and they were talking about how unfair it is that they had to sort of come out as who they feel that they are. And the conversation led into this interesting idea around how trans men don't generally, you know, there's a lot of culture around, you know, the transitioning of ages into, you know, adolescence and adulthood and manhood or whatever, you know, this idea. But you know, most men don't have to explain. Cisgender men have to explain, you know, okay, I'm going to come out as a man to my family because now I feel like a man. Whoever's born cisgender is what I'm saying. And so this idea that gender can be a conversation, and it can be an ongoing conversation to share our experience of what it's like to be ourselves to each other, is something that I think this book is also trying to do, which is just to embrace the conversation, to say that it's not an assumption, and through questioning and through connecting, you know, there's a lot to be learned, both within your own experience of gender. If you've never questioned it, you'll probably learn a lot if you do start thinking about your connection to your own gender, even if you don't come out identifying as anything other than what you were assigned at birth. But just also the idea of being able to embrace the conversation from a little bit more knowledgeable standpoint. That's sort of part of a huge part of what this book's about.
Thank you, Skyler. I want to turn to Stephanie. You had a question some time ago.
Oh no, I was just gonna kind of just give a little bit of perspective just on the coming out at work, which I think they asked about earlier, and yeah, it's a pretty tough thing to do. Like I work for a police agency, and so it's a very hyper masculine environment. So but because it's kind of government as well, I kind of knew that that they had policies in place for diversity and inclusion. But what I found out very quickly was that it was just more of a kind of window dressing, if you like. I think they hadn't really understood of how to be supportive. I think it was just on paper saying, yeah, we have a policy here. So that was kind of a bit of a challenge there as well. And I think certainly I was fortunate, at least because I was already employed, so I didn't expect that I would be losing my job. But you can certainly have no control over how people are going to receive you once you do come out, and that's one of the challenges that I had. And I think for the people, my immediate coworkers, I think the biggest thing was pronouns, and I do feel that and there was a couple of people there that think, well, I've known you with a different pronoun for all these years. Why do I have to change now? It's too hard to so that kind of thing. Well, it's just about being respectful and that kind of stuff. But it was more of an education piece for that. So it didn't really affect my work as such, because I was still capable of doing my job, and they recognized that. So that part wasn't an issue. But certainly, if I'd have been applying for a job, going back a few years now, it would have been extremely difficult, because as much as you may be qualified for the job, and I've known people who are very, very qualified for jobs they've applied for who are trans, and they haven't been hired. And there could be all kinds of reasons saying, well, you're not quite a good fit for this job, or this or that. And it's very difficult without overtly saying that I'm not hiring you because you're trans, but there's other ways around it where they can just, because they may not know until you walk in the door that you're a trans person. Not that you're going to advertise that anyway, but if you're not too passable, for example, then that could be something where the barriers are going up, and a lot of people just don't get hired because of that, unfortunately. But when you're currently employed, yeah, I knew that they wouldn't necessarily be able to fire me, but they could still change my job, things I do, put me on different tasks and stuff like that. But it really it never really changed much for me personally. It was just getting people used to new pronouns and a new name as well, and of course the fact I look different. So that aspect of it was a learning experience. So it took a couple of years, because I transitioned at work 5 years ago. It's almost 6 years ago now. So that part of it was, again, a learning process. So everybody, as Skyler said, everybody's experience is different. And I just want to finish just with a comment about what Skyler had said earlier about not why he didn't want to come to help you with a book. I thought that was kind of interesting, and so it's good to sort of know that. But for me, when I came out to people, one of the things I was really adamant about was I wanted to make sure that they had the right information before I came out to them. So I know when I came out to my mum for the very first time, I literally researched and downloaded and printed up a whole binder of good information related to trans, because on the internet there's so much misinformation out there, and I was just terrified that if I told her that she'd go start looking online and be coming across all these really bad websites with bad information about how trans people get murdered and all this kind of stuff, and it was just so many things that could have added to our worry. So that was really my main reason for wanting to sort of provide as much information as I could up front I didn't want her to go and do the research. I wanted to do it for her. So that was just a different experience for me versus what Skyler had explained earlier. So,
yeah.
Thank you. That's so interesting to hear that difference in your experience, Stephanie, and Skyler's experience with coming out to their families. I can hear, Steph, that you wanted to kind of shield your family in some way from negative perceptions or fear mongering, and focus their attention on acceptance.
Yeah.
Where as Skyler, your behavior was more around allowing the space for me and for others in the family to come to their own understanding. And so, what's really interesting about that is that it's just another indication that there is no one way to be trans. There is no one way to be human. There is no one way to be anything. We are just each of us following our own path of being who we are with whatever differences we embody.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I can just add as well, I think when Skyler was saying about why he didn't want to help with the book at first, not feeling that you knew enough about being trans or about the trans experience. I think, the only thing I would disagree with is that we know more about ourselves than anybody else. So, we could argue by default that we are experts about ourselves. So Skyler, you're an expert on Skyler. So, nobody can sort of explain what your experience is like. You're the only person who can. You're the only person who knows what you're thinking as well, and how you sort of navigate that trans experience. I think what we certainly got all different experiences about the world around us when we're coming out as trans. I think you are definitely an expert on Skyler. And I think that's, don't underestimate that as well. I think you've got a powerful story to tell, and I'm glad you're sharing that with today and as well in the book. So I think that part of it is really, really important too. And just last comment I'm going to make, just really on the emotional safety that you mentioned earlier as well. That's very, very important as well, because I know when I came out to my family that my two daughters were initially my emotional safety net, because having them being supported before I actually went full time, that to me, I couldn't have done it without them. So that was a huge, huge factor for me in making that decision, what I needed to do to go forward. So I felt that they were my emotional safety nets there. So yeah, I mean, I can't say how important that is to have that. So
yeah. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. I think that's it's great to connect and just to hear some perspective and some of your experiences. And I think that's absolutely true. I think the idea of we're all experts on ourselves. Like, you can't tell somebody else who they are, right? You have to. You also have to find out who you are through your own journey, right? The idea of sharing a story can be liberating, and it can also be incredibly intimidating. And when it comes to sort of the public aspect of it, for something that feels so private and takes up so much internal space, the passing of those two energies can be pretty intense, right? And so and part of it too, and it's one of those things that I had written a little bit about, and I decided to take it out of the book, was that actually there's also quite a lot of judgment within sort of the queer population, and sort of the idea of sort of how do you express yourself in a way that is going to sit okay with other people that might share the experiences, right? And that's something I felt intimidated about, which is that languaging something that feels so intimate and so accurate maybe in myself might feel completely wrong for somebody else, and that's completely accurate for them. And so that's where I think the emotional safety comes in so important, is to just make sure you are able to connect with somewhere where you can just be yourself, right? And that's okay, and it's embraced, right?
That notion of or that experience, not just a notion, but the experience of feeling safe in your home is really, and in your family, is absolutely the essential key to being able to move into the experience and live your own life, and live the life as you choose, not as you're bound to live it. And I know that in my own research, I came across so many really difficult stories of people all over the world who could not. They could not speak. They could not language how they were feeling. They could not reveal it because it would be dangerous, or death-defying, or at the very least, really, really uncomfortable. Be excommunicated from their community or from their family or their country. And there are lots of stories like that. Yeah, I know that, so Skyler, in talking about your own practice, so you have a practice as a psychotherapist, so it's in these times, it's a really great profession. It's such a great helping profession. You have mentioned that you also have to consider whether or not you reveal to your clients, when and if you reveal your being trans. Is it important? Is it an issue? Will it impact the relationship you have with your client? Is it even and is it even a necessary point to mention?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a registered psychotherapist yet.
Right.
So
Okay. So
right. I just wanted that to be out there in case it. I don't know. All
so
kinds
an almost psychotherapist.
So I'm a pre-licensed psychotherapist. And yeah, that's the thing, right? Coming out in your workplaces can all look so different, right? Workplaces for me look like a lot of one-on-one work with people. Yeah, it's been an interesting aspect of work that I didn't expect to really take into account. And it's just another layer of things, you don't know until you're sort of faced with that, right? At this point, that was part of writing as well. At this point, I now have a public voice. So if somebody were to Google my name, which new clients probably do that, it'll come up. And it kind of came to a point where, because I'm self-employed, and the communities that I work with, when I have worked with trans youth groups and things like that, it's embraced. That's the point of the group. But also, I would hope that whoever's coming to me as a client, and I will find a working therapeutic relationship. And if it's not the right fit, it's not going to be the right fit. And so I'm not too worried about that for me in this aspect. But it has definitely come up in terms of, it's important to have clients that ask, do you have any lived experience with gender variance, right? Or transness, transitioning of sorts. And it's really important for some clients, whereas other clients, are cisgender, straight, wouldn't have, maybe wouldn't have no idea, right? And it just depends. So every job is different, and new things come up all the time. I don't think we know when that ends. I did see Trina, I think you had your hand up.
I did. I know we're approaching 8:00, so I don't want to keep anybody on the call.
I wanted to make sure, you got in there. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Skyler. Thanks first for sharing so thoughtfully and carefully and just and generously your story. Any person that represents themselves, that puts themselves and their own story out there to straighten. Well, at least I'm maybe the only stranger on the Zoom call. I'm not sure, but I saw a posting for this talk through LinkedIn, so it's very, very random.
Great. Yeah.
So yeah. So thank you. So for me, thank you so much for just putting yourself out there, and thanks for this book to Suzanne and you. Thanks for that contribution. I work in an equity, diversity, and inclusion role for a community services agency, an employment agency, and I'm actually wrapping up the role soon. We specifically focus on inclusion, and we try to move past the window dressing, as Stephanie had kind of called it earlier. We work with workplaces, and so oftentimes we're starting with the window dressing. So my question to you is coming from the advocacy lens. And I'm just wondering, as you market this book and get out there on the path, and work with community services agencies and schools. If you were asked the question, what do you wish was different? What would your answer be? Or what would one answer be?
Yeah. How much time do we have?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I guess, who do you want to ask? My mom or me?
Oh, I'm going to throw it out there. Yeah.
Well, do you want to answer this first?
If there could be one thing different, what would it be?
Yeah, what would you wish was different in, as you advocate, if you're in a public school or if you're in a community services agency and you were asked the question from an audience member, what do you wish was different? You've got this book out here, and what's one thing that comes to mind? Maybe we could focus on a school, for example. If you're in a school, what would an answer look like? And if that's too hard and too much, it's okay.
Yeah. So I'll just say an answer, and then I'll turn it to Skyler. I think for me, what I hope for is that difference will just be accepted and integrated with no fear or discrimination or bias, and that it would be fluidly integrated, whether it was gender variance, sexual orientation variance, physical, cultural, whatever variances that we as a human species would be able to integrate and accept difference without issue. That's, my Pollyanna answer.
Oh, no. Thank you. Thank you.
Skyler, what would you say?
Yeah, I wanted to say, and world peace at the end of that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, miscongeniality, world peace.
Why not? Why not? Let's go for it, right? Yeah, I don't know where to start, to be honest, with that question, Trina, because I think there's so many different aspects. If it's like a school or a workplace, I would say safe washrooms, right? Have an option for gender neutral washrooms. I would, if you're talking about forms, changing pronouns and having the ability to identify other than male, female, that's a lot more common over the last few years. You see that. It's still kind of a newer thing on forms, so you still see old forms that don't have that as an option. I think there's so many different things to think about when you're trying to embrace a shift in social standing. When you think about workplaces, having human resources, actually, whoever's in charge of human resources or whoever's working that job, be trained in, gender variance. In terms of, this is just this one particular thing that we're talking about, gender variance, but have training in what the heck that means. So maybe have resources like trans helpline, so that information is there available for employees or students, right? Mm-hmm. Just resources so that people don't feel that they're the only ones, and that saying something doesn't feel like they're asking for the moon, right? So right. Like at one point I went to trade school out in BC, and the school that I went to only had one accessible washroom, but where I was learning, where the workshop that I was like 4 buildings over, and that was the only place that when I went to human resources and said, hey, like, I don't feel safe going to the washroom here, it was a completely cisgender, male dominated environment, and I had experienced violence and things in which I didn't feel safe, and I brought it to human resources, and they said, well, sorry, you're just gonna have to run across 4 buildings over, and that's all we can do, sorry, like, and then see you later. And it meant that I had to miss class to do that, and it just, things like that, that you don't really think about when it comes to a workplace. Like there's a lot of politics around washrooms. There's a lot, and so yeah, it's a big question. Those are some of the things that come to mind.
No, it is a big question. It stems out of those small but meaningful spaces and places, such as the washrooms, and even debates around sharing pronouns, right? Shifting from the don't ask, don't tell to a please ask, please tell, and sometimes people are looking for feedback and answers and around those types of things. So I was just yeah. I know. What do you wish was different is such a big and loaded question. So it is like let's dream together kind of thing. I know. So thank you for even entertaining that question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if anybody else has any input. Like, does something else come up?
Stephanie.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Who?
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, just to add to that, Trina, I know when I came out at work, before I came out, I spent probably about 3 or 4 months just looking around locally, just to see it within my organization, to see what resources there were as well. I know Skyler's mentioned that is how important that is, but there was literally nothing. So that really made me realize that I had to do all the legwork myself before when I came out to work. I wanted to make sure they had the resources available to them about how to manage transitioning in the workplace, that kind of thing. So I scoured all these big corporation policies and stuff like that, just so that I had all the links ready for my HR folks. So I just provided a whole pile of that stuff. So that really, they were able to hit the ground running once they had all that information there, rather than sort of fumble and trying to sort of how do we do this, So that was what I did. But again, it's the research and not seeing those resources there was a huge, huge thing. So that really, for some people I know that would say, well, I'm not going to come out of work because it's just nothing here for me. So that could keep somebody in the closet longer as well. So having good resources, being able to talk to people as well is really important. And I think about what, would be different, I would say, apart from that, I would say from a personal standpoint, purely selfish, but wish I'd been born a genetic female. So apart from that, but even when I look back at that, even the experience of living in two genders in my life as well, it's been an experience like no other. So I don't know if I'd change that. I think I've learned a lot, and I've met a lot of amazing people on this journey as well. So I think that's been, when I look at, it's not about how you get from A to B. It's taking in everything around you as you on that journey. And I think that's so important as well. And I certainly wouldn't change it for the world. I really wouldn't. And so, being slightly older, not quite too old, but I didn't have the internet around when I was really, really struggling with this years, when I was in my teens. So that part of it, having the internet at that time would have been a great help as well, knowing that I wasn't alone from a much younger age as well. So, yeah.
I have to say that, listening to, to both of you, Skyler, your transition from female to male, and Stephanie, your transition from male to female, has given both of you an experience that we cisgender people will never have, which is to have an experience of the world from different gender perspectives. And that's, I know, Stephanie, you've talked about your different experience in workplace as a male, and hearing those conversations and being part of that. And now as a female, there's a very different perspective that you've
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I have to shout a lot louder.
Yeah. As a female, it's different. And I know, Skyler, you've talked about your difference too, from, being, growing up a female and then now as a male. And you've often talked about now you're a dude, you're a white dude in the world. And that puts you in a different privileged position than you were 10 years ago. And so those are, so those are really interesting. And in fact, that would be another really great dialogue to hear that discussion. I would really love to hear that discussion too, about what those various perceptions are and what you're bringing, because we cis people only see a singular experience, a singular perspective. Yeah. So I see it's
Catalina wants to speak. Catalina wants to.
Yeah.
I did notice that. That's great. Thank you, Paul. Kata.
Thank you. And congratulations. And I was on the launch of the book as well. And I want to touch in one point that was touched by Stephanie before, and also slightly by Skyler. What is more challenge for you, or more frustrated? Dealing with people that is openly doing, and they starting from the point that any kind of discrimination is inadmissible and it's not okay. But the people that at least you know upfront how they believe and all those kind of things, or when you deal with corporations or offices that had the diversity and inclusion policy, that they don't follow through. That they said, oh, but we have it here. You cannot tell us that we are not following that because we have it. But at the end, and sorry for my expression, they're doing like showing the finger in a way because we have the policies.
If I can just to sort of address that part of it. I mean, with a policy, I mean, the intention's good to have it, and I think the HR people, I mean, they're certainly trained in how to sort of administer any diversity inclusion policy. So, but when it comes to the nuances of being like for a trans person, for example, they really didn't understand a lot of that as well. So, while it's one thing to have a policy in place, there wasn't enough, in my opinion, tools to teach everybody of how to be supportive. To say it's great that we do have a policy in place, but we now have to teach people how to use that. How does somebody be supportive to a trans person coming out? Could it be like a coworker or somebody else that they know in the office? They just don't do that, and there's no way. So everybody has to sort of learn for themselves. So that was kind of what I noticed, because I do a lot of I do training within my organization as well for trans awareness. And one of the things I was running across all the time was just people saying, well, I never knew anything about that. And these are sometimes people who work in diversity and inclusion. And I just said, well, this is, in my opinion, just how to do that. So if you're open to that conversation, then we can indeed, sort of show you how to be supportive. And that's what we were doing through some of that training that we did. But even to the commissioner of our organization, I had that conversation one-on-one with him as well, to saying the same thing. And I said, we need to teach people how to actually be supportive. Now, whether you're coming out to be supportive for somebody who's trans or just coming out as a lesbian, gay, whatever, some people have to just do that by themselves and hope that people around them have already, can learn on their own. But some people just are not able to do that. So they do need to have that extra training. So now, thankfully, they're starting to listen to that, and we're starting to get a lot more awareness training for our diversity and inclusion policy as well to help people. So, yeah, I do what I can. I'm only just one voice, though. So.
It's a really great question, Kata, and one that workplaces everywhere are facing right now. Some are struggling with, and some are facing. I know I've had the experience of going to workplaces across the country and doing some training with management, with staff, when there is a person who has identified as transitioning. And yes, there may be policies in place. There's a requirement for all workplace. It's law that all workplaces have a health and safety policy, that they have respect in the workplace policy. Not all organizations do have respect in the workplace policy. And if they do, they may not be followed. And so, as Stephanie said, there's a requirement for an organization to provide a supportive culture with that policy and not just have it. I mean, I For years, I worked in an organization that prided itself in having all of the policies. In fact, they won awards for healthy workplace. They won awards, national awards, for being the healthiest workplace because they had all the policies. And all you had to do was walk into an elevator at any time of day, and you would know that ain't a really healthy workplace. And it was terrible behavior because it was not part of the culture. It was up here, but not down here. And I think that that's what's taking place now, is that organizations are having to come on board, some willingly and some not so willingly. Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly say that certainly my organization has come a long way in the last 5 years. So I'm very thankful for that, and I'm glad we're moving in the right direction anyway. So
it's great.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking at the time, and I don't want to keep you because we've billed this to be for 8 o'clock. But before we close up, does anyone want to ask one last question or make a comment before we close?
Well, just a quick comment, sort of to Stephanie's point about you, Skyler, having an expertise within your own experience, and now that you'll be soon a registered psychotherapist, I'm sure. Have you thought of well, you can also help others transition and learn from and broaden your experience of what other experiences are all about? Is that something you've thought about?
As in, do I work with clients who are transitioning or hoping to transition?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I do currently work with clients that transition. So I've been working as a counselor for about 3 years. And I work with adults, so 18 and older. I have worked with the City of Toronto Youth Services as well, but I'm not currently doing that. With their Families in Transition program, which has a component of the caregivers or parents as well as the youth, and they're two different groups that happen simultaneously. It's a really interesting program that happens. It's called the FIT program. But yeah, I work with individuals who are transitioning or who are curious about exploring their gender or sexuality as part of the work that I offer as a mental health counselor. Yeah.
Well, then I see by the vision before me that there's another book in you down the road.
There just might be. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I didn't welcome you, Brad, but now we say goodbye. Really nice to see everyone, and such a pleasure to have everyone come on the call and be part of this dialogue. So thank you for being part of this.